The future of businesses depends on their ability to adapt to the new normal and the pace at which they can leverage the power of emerging technologies like AI, IoT, AR, and VR. After an overwhelming response to Day 1 of New Horizon presented by GE, the Day 2 of this mega virtual AI-focused summit was on the role of technology in tackling climate change. The primary focus was on renewable energy and cybersecurity. The day began with an opening address followed by an insightful interview with Larry Culp, Chairman and CEO, GE.
And I want to understand from you how you are viewing the recovery that we are currently seeing globally. You did say that momentum was building across your various business segments, from healthcare to services, and initial signs of recovery in aviation. Do you feel confident of being able to build on that?
Shireen, good to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity. I do think that we feel good about the overall recovery as we look across the GE portfolio today. Obviously, most eyes are on the recovery in aviation. We see global departures down as of this morning, 26% versus the same time in 2019. But that said, we have seen a gradual return, particularly here in the US and parts of Europe as well, amongst the narrow body fleet. That's good for the industry. That's good for our service business. Certainly the broader trans-Pacific, transatlantic routes are slowly coming back. We see that in our wide body activity, but I think we're optimistic given the pace and the momentum that we see building. Healthcare has been a business that has really been a standout for us through the course of this pandemic. We were hit early on as hospitals paused to care for those impacted by COVID-19, but we've certainly seen a modernization effort both in the private and the public sectors ever since. In renewables, everyone's focused on COP26 here in a matter of weeks, let alone the commitments that governments and companies have made to 2030 and 2050. We've seen significant interest in what we do both in our on and offshore wind businesses there, let alone in our grid infrastructure business.
This was followed by an insightful keynote address by the Union Minister, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, for Environment, Forest and Climate Change.
हम जानते हैं कि जलवायु परिवर्तन के कारण विश्व का जो तापमान बढ़ने की जो संभावना बढ़ रही है, उसके कारण दुनिया एक नए संकट की ओर जा रही है। ये संकट ऐसा है जो सारी मानवता ही नहीं, पृथ्वी पर रहने वाली सारे जीव जंतु वनस्पति सबको चुनौती देने जा रहा है। ऐसे में दुनिया के सभी देशों की जिम्मेदारी है कि तकनीकी के इस दौर में हम उस नई तकनीकी को अपनाएं जो जलवायु परिवर्तन के इस दौर में विश्व में आने वाले जलवायु संकट के लिए सृजनात्मक हो, उसको विध्वंस करने वाली ना हो। और इसलिए CNBC 18 के इस संवाद के माध्यम से आज जिन नई विषयों पर चर्चा होगी, मुझे लगता है इस मंथन के बाद कुछ अच्छे विषय आएंगे। जहां तक भारत का सवाल है, भारत ने पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के बाद अपने जो NDCs हैं उनको प्राप्त करने में सफलता पाई है। भारत ने वैकल्पिक ऊर्जा में आज 37% निर्भरता प्राप्त कर ली है। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में भारत ने वैकल्पिक ऊर्जा का 2030 तक 450 गीगावाट का लक्ष्य भी तय किया है। इसके साथ ही अपने वन्य क्षेत्रों को बचाने के लिए, अपनी धरती को हरा भरा करने के लिए भारत सरकार के द्वारा एक बड़ी डेजर्टिफिकेशन को रोकने के लिए योजना भी चलाई जा रही है। हम अपनी प्रकृति, अपनी जैव विविधता, अपने वन्य प्राणी, अपने जीव जंतु, अपने पर्यावरण, अपने सुंदर समुद्र तटों को बचाने के लिए पूरी तरह प्रतिबद्ध हैं। और इसलिए भारत में अभी कुछ हमारे जो बीचेस हैं उनको अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मान्यता प्राप्त हुई है। हमारे जो कुछ 14 टाइगर रिजर्व्स हैं उनको मान्यता प्राप्त हुई है। भारत में कुछ अच्छी झीलों को रामासर के अंतर्गत मान्यता प्राप्त हुई है। हम सब इस धरती के ट्रस्टी हैं और इसलिए इस धरती का पे आने वाले समय की पीढ़ियों का जीवन सुरक्षित रहे, उसके लिए हम प्रतिबद्ध हैं।
Decarbonization is a very crucial topic in the coming decade, and the next discussion was on meeting India's climate goals with decarbonization technology. How do you think we are really moving towards meeting our climate goals, and what are the impediments that we are facing? Well, in terms of the Paris Agreement, of course, we had to keep the global warming temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So how far are we from there, and what are the barriers that we are facing?
Well, thank you. Look, overall, in order to limit the global temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade, we have to get the whole world to a net zero economy, net zero greenhouse gases around mid-century. And I think a reasonable set of targets is all rich developed countries there by 2050, all developing countries there by 2060. And the good news is that we, broadly speaking, know the technologies which are going to do this. They are decarbonizing the electricity system, primarily via renewables, also some other technologies. It's a big role for the electrification of the economy, electrifying road transport. It's a big role also for green hydrogen, which can enable us to decarbonize steel, decarbonize global shipping. So we sort of know the technologies. As for India, India is taking many of the steps in the right direction. There is the clear target, which Prime Minister Modi has reiterated, of 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. And if you put that together with other technologies, battery technologies, the emergence of hydrogen technologies, the work that we in the ETC have done with the Energy and Resources Institute of India at TERI makes us believe that it is absolutely possible for India by 2030 to be getting over 50% of its electricity from renewable sources.
India had announced its three, major targets in terms of, nationally determined, contribution, and one of them was actually, reducing carbon footprint by 33 to 35% in by 2030, and the other one was of 40% of electricity coming from renewable sources, and also additionally creating carbon sink, which could be 2.5 to 3 billion ton of carbon equivalent. So I think in these three directions, India is progressing, relatively good, and India has already, crossed 100 megawatt in terms of 100 gigawatt in terms of renewable energy, and 2030 target of 450 megawatt is actually not really far as and wide. So I think it is doing pretty well, and by 2022 the target of 175 is also quite clearly to be achieved.
We came with a revised target of 175 gigawatt by 2022 and now 450 by 2030. So these are the top line numbers, and I think this is a very, very aggressive plan that the government has. But having said that, I think government has taken a number of steps to encourage the penetration of renewable energy in the country. Starting with utility scale, I think a huge number of bids have come through central government agencies, as also by the state discoms, to encourage renewable energy and also to meet the obligation of renewable power. So there is a RPO obligation which each of the states have to meet. Of course, the full compliance has not happened by all the states, but there are some states who are very active, and they have done much more than the mandatory requirement. So I think the government has been pushing and keeps on taking various policy initiatives, as well as a lot of regulatory changes keeps on happening for promoting renewable.
Coming up after the break is an interesting fireside chat with Daniel Mayfield, VP and CTO, GE Renewable Energy. And the topic is how to tackle climate emergency with technology and innovation. After an overwhelming response on day one of New Horizon presented by GE, our focus was renewable energy and cybersecurity. On day two, we were joined by the Minister of Environment and the GE Global CEO, Larry Culp.
Multi-billion-dollar footprint for us. When we think about GE and our purpose of building a world that works, both in terms of precision healthcare, the future of flight, let alone the energy transition, those are
the theme for this panel is on how we can leverage technology and innovation to really tackle climate emergency. And who better to take us through this than Daniel? Daniel, if you look at the recent IPCC report on climate change, the findings are quite dire. It's really brought home the kind of climate emergency we face. So what kind of immediate steps do we need to do in terms of cutting carbon emissions, in terms of decarbonization? How can we really leverage technology to this effect?
Well, the best place to start, the biggest action we can take is in the power generation industry. That's the one I'll talk about the most because it has really such an incredible opportunity to lead the decarbonization of our entire energy sector. And energy is, and all the things that we do to support energy around the world, that's responsible for more than 3/4 of our global greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. In fact, if you look at it, the United Nations has set an ambitious goal of net zero energy sector by 2050. But in order to achieve that, I believe 88% of the electricity that's produced needs to come from renewable sources. That's going to be a steep challenge. So is there a role that technology can play in harnessing sources of renewable energy?
Yeah, there's probably 4 main areas of technology that I could refer to. The first is just more innovation, continuing to lower costs. We're going to be making bigger, for example, wind turbines, more efficient, bigger wind turbines. And we need to think about new manufacturing techniques like additive blades or additive concrete towers and new methods for making them that reduce the demand for critical materials and things in the supply chain that are just really hard to scale. So innovation on the product itself. I mentioned the grid. One of the second piece of innovation is around increasing the dispatchability of those assets. So are they on demand? Can you get power when you need it? So at the wind turbine level, you can increase the capacity factor, have it produce energy even in lower wind, for example, or more times of day. You could also hybridize, add energy storage to capture some during a solar or wind excess time of energy. And that helps balance out and provide more dispatchability. The third one is that reliable grid operation. You can't put a lot of energy into the grid and then use it effectively if you can't move it around and keep the grid stable. So there's a whole nother third aspect of technologies around adapting to this new power electronics interface of renewable energy that's replacing traditional synchronous generators that are on the grid today. And then lastly, we've got to be able to figure out how to maintain our fleets, but also service them so that they get better over time. So in essence, continuing to grow the value of a system over its life instead of just managing an industrial asset as it ages.
Right. Daniel, decarbonization is also an area that you're very passionate about. Can you take us through how GE is leading decarbonization efforts around the world through its differentiated products, services? What kind of cutting-edge innovation can we expect here?
Yeah, so within GE Renewable Energy, we are helping our customers deliver more renewable energy to the world. So that's a big part of how we're impacting decarbonization overall. But as a business, we're also modeling these sustainable practices through our own programs around reducing our energy use or switching to renewable energy, or even just becoming more energy efficient. We reached our goal to become carbon neutral by the end of 2020 last year. And it took a lot of work. We calculated our carbon footprint. We identified a lot of things to do to reduce it. We continue to do that, and we will forever, as I am sure most businesses will. And then, that's only the beginning. So there's a lot more to do to drive sustainability in operations. And the broader GE company, we've been focusing on emissions reductions for over a decade now. We achieved 21% emission reductions between 2011 to 2019.
The fireside chat was followed by an industry-focused panel discussion on how industries are working towards achieving climate goals.
The way things are coming together, are you seeing a more stakeholder approach when it comes to climate goals? Are you seeing businesses, industries, governments, academia working together? Are things better than what they were in terms of approaching climate goals?
Yeah, I would start by saying it's actually an interesting time in the world where you've actually seen CO2 emissions grow 40% over the last 20 years. And I think because of that, you are absolutely seeing that partnership, public and private, government, academics, businesses, really go and address this problem more aggressively than I've ever seen in my 20 plus career inside of energy. And when you look at how you're doing it, this is the important part. It's really a very broad-based approach. It's not one solution solves all the issues. You're seeing renewables, growing renewables as fast as possible. That's the right thing to do. But when you start looking at, is that enough? When you look at forecasts for renewables and you look at net zero models, it says that you should do that. That's absolutely the right thing, but you need other pathways, other alternatives.
A lot of countries, 59 countries have now set net zero targets. That they represent around 54% of global greenhouse gas emissions. In our own campaign, RE100, 235 companies have now committed to using 100% renewable electricity for their global operations, and together they have their combined electricity use is equivalent to that of the UK at over 240 terawatt hours per year. So there's significant ambition, and many of those organizations and countries are following through with tangible action. And I think India's renewable energy electricity targets are certainly among the more ambitious, committed to increase their target from 175 gigawatts of capacity in 2022 to 450 gigawatts by 2030.
India's energy requirement is probably going to be one of the highest for the next decade. The challenge is that we already have large capacities, and obviously the conventional sources of energy are cheaper at this point of time.
In terms of collaboration in this space, clearly, I don't think any of us can do this alone, right? So I think it's an ecosystem that has to come together. Startups play an absolutely important role.
New age technology is critical to growth of industries across sectors, but adopting technology at scale is fraught with multiple challenges like cybersecurity and risk management. The last panel discussion of this two-day summit on technology and innovation was focused primarily on the tough measures for cybersecurity.
Could you throw some more light on the nature of these attacks and which sectors have been the most impacted?
Yes, absolutely right. We have observed a rise in the attacks, and not only in the volume, but also in the sophistication of the attacks. We have a better and better network. In terms of what? In terms of performance and latency. The unsung hero of 5G or high performance Wi-Fi is the low latency. So there's an ecosystem of application starting to make decision without necessarily coming back to the core, where a robust policy traditionally was presiding to the authorization. And that makes this new ecosystem, this new distributed architecture, even more vulnerable than it used to be. So yes, when you look at the reports, there is some area of challenge for us in charge as an ecosystem of cyber officers, not only the vendors, but the end users, the partners, the extended hyper-connected world. Yes, it's under attack like it has never been.
It's very surprising. Most of the companies in India don't have bug bounty programs. And the other bigger problem is, even if people like me who ethically discover a vulnerability in a company and then they try to report it, we can have some legal action against us. So that's the biggest problem which we have in India. There is no legal framework using which we can ethically report vulnerabilities to these companies to secure their systems. And on the other side, the army of black hat hackers is also on rise, right? They have been constantly looking out for cloud security misconfiguration. They are looking out for assets of these companies from outside, from attackers' perspective, and then they are trying to dump the database of these companies.
The responsibility lies with corporate entities to report cybersecurity incidents to the CERTAN, which is the emergency cyber emergency team for India. And the liability part has a very simple provision under Section 46 IT Act, which allows the users to take recourse for breach of their data. But how many times have you come across cases being filed or people utilizing this very inexpensive, quick, low-cost remedy? Either because they are not aware of the remedy or there is not sufficient bandwidth for exercising these remedies, all of these go unattended. Now, the outcome of that is the criminal is not scared because they think they can get away with this crime, and there is not sufficient pressure on corporate entities to take better preventive or protective measures.
What we are seeing is, with a huge growth in connected devices, whether at home or factories or, at work and public places, rapid changes in technology, increased requirements for data security and, data privacy, increase in, the usage of cloud applications, the so-called SaaS applications, which are exploding, around the world. You're seeing lots of ransomware threats, as you know. I would also add geopolitical issues to it, right? Countries are doing cyber warfare, cyber spying, right? And then finally, the pandemic-induced remote working, right? That also increased threats, on the cybersecurity side. So because of all these factors and reasons, we do see significant growth in the cybersecurity sector in the foreseeable future.
Going forward, businesses across sectors around the globe will need to enhance the pace of tech adoption. Emerging technology, breakthrough innovation, and advanced engineering solutions can enable organizations to pivot to growth and build a world that works.